If Trump's executed or assassinated or Elon Musk or anything like that, then I'm afraid we're going to see violence on a scale that we haven't seen in this country since probably the 60s.
Why is it that you believe, or at least why is it that it's the case to where we're way more divided than it's ever been, right? And what led up to this?
Well, I think that what you saw was it started with Obama, right? Like, just take racially for a second. Like, I think the country we're never going to be post-racial. That'll never happen. But it mattered less and less as time went on. We elected the first black president. I never liked him, but I understood the appeal. If you were a black person that lived through the civil rights movement, it's like, yeah, that's a big moment. Good for you. Like, I'm not going to, I think you're dumb if you ever vote for someone because of their race, but you're historically ignorant and like lying to yourself if you don't see why that's an important moment for people that lived through that moment. And then Obama, did everything he could to drive a racial wedge. And I think also played this sort of grievance politic cultural Marxist game where it was sort of taking the ideas of Marxists, of the oppressor versus the oppressed, and then using every institution in our government, in our culture to magnify that, except you could break it down on everything, not just race. And so you could have cultural Marxism on gender, on sexual orientation, on religion, on ability, on height, on wealth, like literally anything. You say this group's the oppressor, this group's the oppressed. And what happened was our institutions went along with that. So academia bought into that, and the media bought into that. And so what you started to see was this single message being pushed with this sort of flavor of the day. Well, what's the cultural issue of the day? What's the group of the day that we're going to say is the most aggrieved? And victimhood culture became the highest thing you could aspire to. The greatest social currency we had was victimhood. And so therefore, everyone was in a rush to claim discrimination and to claim oppression. And you were used that to divide people. So you no longer had what previously we might have saw in a traditional political argument, like, well, we're going to have Newt Gingrich, arguing that we need more fiscal responsibility versus Bill Clinton saying no more stimulus, but more programs. Like, that wasn't the divide anymore. The divide was sort of, you're horrible, evil people because of the way you were born, or you're a horrible, evil person because of the religion that you have, or, et cetera. And I think that's where this division really started. And because it was mainstreamed and accepted, we started to see that the people that were engaged in that were actually benefiting significantly. One of the things I talk about, my show was about this today before I came on, was talking about the idea of violence and political violence and why I condemn it so much. And I remember in 2016, Richard Spencer, or maybe it was even before that, like 2014, Richard Spencer, who was like the biggest white nationalist in the United States, he gets punched at a stop sign. And there was this huge conversation amongst the Western world. Is it okay to punch a Nazi? And I remember this article from one of Britain's biggest papers, The Guardian, that was like, no, but yes. And let's explain why. And I remember at the time arguing with people on blogs online and in real life, like why that's such an insane opinion, because I'm like, even if I could go through the arguments to why morally and strategically that's wrong, but just to skew all those for a second and understand that once you say yes, the very next comment someone makes is, and you're a Nazi. Right. And once that happened, once you give yourself the moral authority that says we're okay to preemptively use violence as long as you're of this certain group of people, the temptation is too great to say, well, every issue you believe is morally correct, right? Yeah, of course. That's why I believe it. And it would be a moral failing or immoral to have the other side win that argument, right? Absolutely. So therefore, they're basically Nazis, right? Yep. And therefore you could use violence. And that's where we're at. So why are we so divided now? Because what happened was the other side started to push back at that, and they were winning. And I have predicted for a long time that all of the violence you saw from groups like Black Lives Matter, Antifa, etc., none of the institutions that backed them or ignored them, they never cared about them. Like Barack Obama, all the corporations and government officials you saw saying, yes, Black Lives Matter, and taking a knee, in solidarity with George Floyd, they didn't give a shit. They never cared, right? They just saw it as politically useful as the time. They thought these little brown shirts going out and harassing right-wingers or Christians or conservatives or Trump people, it was worth it. It was benefiting. But as soon as it targets the actual people with power, they're going to bring their boot down on these people harder than they can imagine. And there is one thing that's true that you hear the left say all the time, where they talk about violence is the language of the unheard. There's some truth to that. And the truth is, the more desperate you are, the more radical tactics you're willing to take. The irony is, we're seeing the left engage in so much violence while almost every institution at least paid lip service to their cause. So ask yourself, if those institutions stop paying lip service to those causes and stop protecting him, what are those groups going to do? We are going to have a period of sustained political violence that comes from radical lefties because they feel that they're losing their grip on institutional power. By the way, they're right about that. And people are no longer listening to their BS. It's not enough just to shout slogans like Black Lives Matter anymore, because the people have woken up to what a scam it was. That's why you're seeing Tesla owners being vandalized en masse. That's why you're seeing 55% of people that identify as left saying that it's justifiable to murder Donald Trump. They feel that they have gaslit themselves into feeling that they're morally superior to their opponents and therefore anything's justified. And unfortunately, an inevitable reaction to that is people on the other side start saying that if it's a line in the sand, then we're going to be on the other side of that line and we're going to use similar tactics as you. And so we're coming to a head where, because cooler heads didn't prevail previously, or rather the last big chance we have for cooler heads to prevail is a Trump administration that radically shakes this up. If it fails, if Trump's executed or assassinated or Elon Musk or anything like that, then I'm afraid we're going to see violence on a scale that we haven't seen in this country since probably the 60s.
Do you think that, like back in Pennsylvania when Donald Trump was first attempted on the suicide, if that bullet would have hit Donald Trump, what do you think the political outcome would have been? That, because that was a big thing at the time. And look, we saw a bunch of lefties even on TikTok saying, we wish he missed, right? He missed the bullet. What an idiot. How dare you? XYZ. Like the violence was at a high peak of what they actually thought about not only Donald Trump, but his supporters as well, especially when Destiny came out and said, yeah, I don't give a shit about the man who got, deleted at that rally, dude. So let me ask you this. What would have the political landscape look like if it was actually successful on that?
Well, the irony is, and if you're some insane psychopath out there listening that's considering using violence against Trump, if that succeeds, the alternative is going to be worse for you, because you're going to give sympathy to the people that come into power next. And unless you take out JD Vance too, I think JD Vance is going to be a more effective version of Donald Trump. I think so. I do. I think that JD Vance has the potential to maybe be the best politician in my lifetime. I think that he is ideologically populist. I think Donald Trump has a gut feeling towards populism. I think he respects sort of the working class and the average people and sees that they've been forgotten and sees that sort of the bad deals that the leaders in this country have had for years to enrich themselves have significantly hampered manufacturing and the working class in this country. But I think JD Vance understands it at a more fundamental level and is more ideological about it. Now, there's advantages to being ideological or not. Trump not being ideological, one of the advantages, he's malleable. He's willing to listen to his supporters. So, for example, if you remember his first term, he came out after the Vegas shooting and was against bump stocks, because I don't think he's ideologically that big into the Second Amendment. But once he saw his supporters were like, whoa, all of a sudden he was like, oh, okay, fine. And
it was the same thing with Operation Warp Speed, right? Rob, remember when he started promoting, the vaccines, he was just like, okay, well, you know what? He wasn't pushing it as much as possible after he got some backlash from his followers, like the people that voted him in.
And it's nice in some senses to have a politician. Now, I would rather have the politician that ideologically agrees with everything I say. And it's not at the whim of, well, I hope we could get enough people to speak to convince him otherwise. But nonetheless, that's the truth of it, how I see it. I think that Vance, if it would have happened, let's say during the election system, Vance wins running away, unless there's significant cheating. But it would be too much at that point for the left to win centrists that would blame, rightfully or wrongly, the assassination attempt on Trump on the Democratic Party. There was, in addition to that, like there's certainly a lot that Trump brings to, I would never besmirch him as far as his talents to win an election. But there's a lot of downside too. Like baked in the case with Trump more than probably any politician are people that would vote for him no matter what, ever. They would vote for him, and people that would never vote for him no matter what, right? Like, so the swing voters that may go with him or may go against are probably less with Donald Trump than almost any presidential candidate in my lifetime, right? So if Trump goes out, there's an awful lot of people that would never vote for Trump that would be so turned off by that that they would have voted for the Republican ticket. And you would have probably seen more Republicans win downstream in the House and the Senate as a result of that. My hope would be in that world that J.D. Vance would pick up the mantle. Now, maybe they wouldn't allow him. Maybe there would be lawfare against him or another attack against him, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, for God's sakes, the second person, Ryan Ruth, that talked about killing Trump, apparently was asking for Stinger missiles to blow his airplane out of the sky, in which case he may have taken down Vance and a whole swarm of people that were with Trump. I mean, that's how insane things were getting there. And by the way, still are, that there are still radical people out there, as some of the numbers we talked about was showing. So, you know, if that happened, though, what you would see is the other reason. So I think you'd be dumb to do that as a lefty, because I think you would entrench support for the MAGA movement even further. And there are people that maybe you would like even less because they'd be more articulate, like J.D. Vance, that would come up. But the other thing is, what would happen would be you would start to see violence become more entrenched on all sides of the ledger. And if that happens, there will be people out there with a tit for tat mentality that will say, okay, you took out our guy. Now, I don't want that. I would call against that. I would say that that's immoral, disgusting, but that's the reality of things. If this would be a breaking point, if Trump gets assassinated, it will break this country in a lot of ways. I'm not saying it would be Mad Max, that it would be unrecoverable, but for years we would see increased intensity, political violence, rhetoric, etc. And you're going to see all sorts of people blamed legitimately and illegitimately. And the last thing I'll say about it is, because people lack faith in our institutions, a huge swath of Trump supporters will not believe whatever the official story is, rightfully so. They're not going to believe the Secret Services or, the FBI's explanation of what happened, and they shouldn't. And that's not my fault, and that's not Trump supporters' fault. That's these institutions' fault for lying to us for so long and being so ideological against the people of this country that they have rightfully so lost the trust of the people. So it would be very bad for the country. I hope that it doesn't occur. If you're a lefty and you hate Donald Trump, then beat him at the ballot box. But this idea that it's somehow legitimate because he's some wannabe dictator is laughable. The left has far more dictators, and they actually use. Did you ever notice this? I'll ask you a question. Did you ever notice that, like, the very things that they're accusing Trump of, they're worried that Trump will do unto them what they themselves have done. So they're worried that Trump will use lawfare. They're worried that Elon Musk, there was this guy from MSNBC, Ari Melber, before Elon bought Twitter, that was like, can you imagine if this guy buys Twitter? What if he kicks off one of the leading candidates, the Democratic candidate, from the platform?
And then they did it.
It's like, that's what you did. That's what Jack Dorsey did. So,